Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are dialing in from today. Super pleased that you could join us. It's great to have you here with us for the session that we're going to be talking about today, which is all around building trust for data and AI strategy success. We have got a brilliant panel of speakers for you today. I'll be moderating. I'm Sophie. So you'll see me in the chat. You'll see me popping up if you want to add any questions into our chat today. And I'll be doing some intros and some next steps for anybody that is really interested in this topic and would like to know more at the end. But we have three brilliant panelists that I'd like to introduce you to. These women are all rock stars in their field, so I'm so excited to be joining them today. We've got Jennifer Agnes, Senior Data Strategist and Executive Coach, part of the Cynozure team. Mary Alfheim, VP Data and Analytics at Scribd. And Maria Ferres, Head of Enterprise Data at Atradius. These women have all built trust in their organisations and are really rocking with their own data and AI strategies. And you'll hear lots of things that they've done, very impressive things that they've done and how they've managed to get there in the session today. Before we dive in and get to know them in more detail, I just want to take people through a little bit more housekeeping, just so that you know where to contact us, where to ask a question, if you'd like to do so. Hopefully the Q&A part is really self-explanatory. There is a Q&A box at the top of your screen. Feel free to drop us a question as we go through. We do have some dedicated time at the end of the panel for us to pose those questions to Jen, to Maria and to Mary today. It would be really nice to hear where you're calling in from. I'm just between Derby and Nottingham in the UK. You might hear that in my accent if you're not a British person, but it's not sunny, it's very cold. I'd love to hear if anyone is somewhere a bit tropical or sunshiny today. We're talking about this topic at Cynozure a lot. This comes up for all of our data leaders and many of our data practitioners. Cynozure is a data analytics and AI company that helps organizations to reach their data potential. That can be anything from helping them to see what they should be doing with data and AI in their strategy, all the way through to implementing it, whether that is on the data management side, whether it's on upskilling their teams in the data culture and literacy space, or through to building the right platforms and tool sets that they need to get there. We draw on a wealth of different industry expertise, and we're really passionate about bringing expertise from different types of organisation, different types of industry together to see what best practice is, which is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about having Jen and Mary and Maria on the call today, because you'll see that they come with a slightly different perspective based on the work that they've been doing. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Jennifer, who's going to kickstart our conversation and our panel today. Jen, thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and welcome Mary and Maria and all of our guests that have joined online. I'm really happy to be here and host this panel with two highly achieved women who have worked not just in the data space, but in the business space over many, many years. And that's what they're going to bring us today in our conversation, I hope, is to talk about their experience in building trust and helping organizations move forward through the human aspect of it as well as the data aspect of it, because you can't do one without the other, as we all know. So as Sophie just mentioned, Mary is from a different sector and a different industry than Maria. Maria is from the insurance sector, Mary e-commerce. I'm going to ask them both to give a little bit of a background about their journeys and what their current careers are like and what their current roles are like. And I think one of the things to hit on is the differentiation between the sectors, but the commonality that we see because it's data and because it's human beings that are doing this work. So I'll first start with Mary. I'll ask you to go first and just tell us a little bit about your current role, what you do, and then you can pass the ball to Maria when you're ready.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Sophie. Hello, everyone. I am Mary Alfheim. As you heard, I'm a VP of Data and Analytics at a company called Scribd, which you may be familiar with. We host documents and kind of premium content in terms of books, ebooks, and audiobooks. So today I lead a team of data scientists and analysts, engineers, and we do this in support of our operations, finance, marketing, and product organizations. So very much run the gamut of all kinds of data, analytics, and AI use cases across this company. So I've been in this field for over 17 years, and I've had the privilege of holding almost every position I could think of riding this data science wave. I've been a data scientist, led marketing, analytics teams, product analytics teams. I've even had a few stints of data product management roles for AI products and data platforms in particular. So similar to Maria, I did spend the first 10 years or so of my career in financial services, where I learned a lot about data trust and data quality, but spent the last 7 or 8 years or so in the media and technology space. So spent time at HBO and launched HBO Max, followed by Amazon and Prime Video. And then that's what led me to the subscription services and the work that I do today in media at Scribd. Okay, over to you, Maria.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, ladies, for the introduction. My name is Maria Ferres. At the moment, I'm heading the enterprise data for a credit insurer, Atradius. My journey has been slightly different, coming from a heavily regulated entities or in the insurance sector. I am also an actuary, and I worked as an actuary for 20 or so years. My journey, I came to become involved in the data scene is because as an actuary, you're trained to develop models and fine-tune them to the inch of your life in accuracy and perfection. But then you hit the workforce and they give you the data and it's like 30% inaccurate. And you think to yourself, why did I spend so many years sharpening my tools for modeling if this is going to be the quality of the data I have to deal with? So slowly over time, I segued into the data in an attempt to solve the data quality and accessibility of the data problem. But of course, around a year 2000, 2005, the volume of data started to increase and the need for certain roles that didn't exist became very prevalent. So people had to reinvent roles or come up with ways of solving the problem before data became a discipline of its own. So in the last 5 to 10 years, I've slowly moved into the heading of the data roles for regulated entities. I've previously built the data function for Lloyd's Insurance Company, and I do that from scratch. And I'm also doing the same for Atradius, building it from ground up. I have, of course, held positions as an actuary in different companies, Zurich, ING. I work with Australian regulators and so on. So I come with understanding of the burden of a regulatory process and the scrutiny it needs to go through. And of course, data plays a role in that.
Thank you both. We can see the different angles, of course, from the experience levels and the roles that you've had in the past. I also come from financial services and as well as manufacturing for a few years at Schneider Electric, but spent much of my career at GE Capital and Credit Suisse. What I think I can just put out there to both of you is, you know, it's easy to change people's perceptions of data, right? As soon as you give them the file, they're ready to use it and off you go. So that's why you've been so successful. Am I right?
Oh, so our comedy show is starting now.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Maria, I'll jump in and then really want to, hear your perspective too. So if I think about where I am now in technology, we absolutely have regulatory requirements that we have to abide by, especially for marketing and GDPR and CCPA in a US or global based business. So that absolutely exists, but not necessarily to the same extent that a financial services company or insurance company may be subject to. And so for me, I have very much had to think about how to find interested and influential partners and leaders in my org who care about data quality to really push those projects across the line. I have to seek to really build trust in myself as a leader and put a vision out there. And that sometimes involves telling stories about opportunities that we could be missing. But more often than not, it's a downside risk that I'm looking to mitigate. And that could be in a customer experience and our understanding of their actions, in data loss, or some kind of loss of precision, especially in like a marketing outreach or a program. But I find that I have to find something that's gone wrong first to get a little bit of attention and use that as a building block to start to get people to talk trusting and data quality and what it means to trust. From there, it's more cultural, but I'm going to pause and maybe Maria, you want to compare and contrast that to what you work backwards from in your sector.
I think in contrast to customer facing, where you have to, sell and you need to compete aggressively, insurance is a product of need. So in that sense, you can be assured that you will have customers because people do need insurance, right? So there's a bit less pressure on that side. So in that way, I have to look at regulatory processes in the company that require heavy data usage to try to get to the point of selling and solving a problem. The problem with insurance companies is they're extremely data heavy and they have a lot of legacy data, a lot of legacy products and systems. So moving things forward is less agile, I would assume and imagine, than other sectors where they need to be very quick reacting. And I think the challenge in that is while they value accuracy of data because regulator demands it, they are more sluggish and slow reacting because of the history that they carry in their processes. So in that way, it can be challenging in a different way that Mary may experience.
Yeah, I find that I collect stories. So when I start at an organization, I spend a lot of time in one-on-ones and interviews, maybe looking at our data myself, maybe doing competitive landscape. Really want to understand pain points that different consumers of data across the organization have experienced. And again, I'm saying pain points because just very practically, I think building up these coalitions starts with loss. It starts with something that's been painful that someone has to deal with. They don't know, what went wrong in the app or the service, so we don't really know how to help them in customer service. We don't manage the data closely enough so that we can update an LTV model as fast as we need to for better marketing campaigns. Or maybe we're just missing data or it's not trusted. And so we don't have insight into how people are using our services. Are they really engaging or are we missing that data? I have to start from those stories and really come up with discrete use cases and kind of work back from that to figure out, well, what would I need to solve this? What do we all have to do? And then start to play that back. It's very much storytelling. And I often find that I have to use a variety of different kinds of storytelling or communication techniques to get that involvement and that alignment, even to get started or to kind of get everyone to agree that this is something worth talking about. It's very hard. Maybe some of you have had this experience as well. I think it can be very difficult to get the attention that you want for a data trust issue unless it's very clear how it affects customers or the business or the bottom line. And that can be a little bit hard to show if you're not directly managing a data product that makes revenue, right? It's a couple of steps removed, but I find that you have to tell that story and help make that case, and something that you have kind of a sponsor who feels the pain of that loss to be your partner.
I'll jump in for a second, Mary. Can I jump in for a second on that? Because I feel like it's such a real scenario, and telling the story really important, but some people aren't really good storytellers, right? This is part of the challenge, I think, as well. And And, all of us think we're okay at telling stories. There is an art and there is a skill to being able to tell that story and make it a convincing one that, is transversal across the organization so others can get a feel for it if they're not directly involved. One of the things, though, I think is that human connection, again, back to my area that I like to focus on, is how to convince sort of each person, right? It's not the general, I hope I go to a meeting and everybody buys into it by me telling a grand story on a PowerPoint slide and my slides look great. It's really that personal connection or professional connection, but in their personal way, right? Everybody hears things differently. Everybody retains things differently. Everybody learns differently. So that, to me, is one of the bigger challenges. And I'd like to get your perspective on when you've got a large, complex organization, and even, Scribd is a smaller organization maybe than Atradius, and it's different sectors, but it's still full of people that have different motivations and potentially different objectives, overt ones and maybe not so overt ones. Can you share some of your experiences on how to find those points of interest that are going to start swaying the general, the company in the right direction versus assuming everybody's going to listen to a story, which I think is the right way to go. But again, people hear things and learn things differently.
I think, as Mary mentioned, she's looking at a bottom-up approach, reaching out to the pain points. But that is absolutely the right approach. But also you have to come top down from the board of directors, from the management down. You also have to manage with the story. One of the grand misperceptions when the data function is created is that the previous experiences of creating a business unit was a create a product, open in a region. They're quite vertical, so one can be left alone to do. The problem with creating a data function is it's transversal. You cannot be left to your own devices to achieve. You need to bring the entire organization along with you. And the term data management can be a bit misleading because it leads people to believe you're managing data, sitting in a database, and you're just moving data around. But really, what you're managing is how people interact with data, and that people part is often missed in the equation. It is a cultural change. It's a literacy program. It's how we touch data, use data, treat data, save data. And it is not just a group of technology people with knowledge of data sitting in a room quietly achieving things. And I think that layer of understanding really cannot be understated or overstated. It requires quite a lot of education and reiteration, because this is also a new topic for a board. The closest they had to a transversal function in a way operating was the creation of the CIO roles in the 90s and 80s. So it's been quite a while since they had to think end-to-end enterprise-wide transformation. And this goes to the point of the data function is a transformation function rather than a vertical. And there lies I think the silver lining of why a lot of data functions don't come to fruition, or they may fail, or end up with a number of frustrated people resigning. I think it is that's a lack of understanding perhaps that leads to it.
I totally agree. It's not a technology or architecture problem most of the time. That's actually really straightforward. It can be a people and a culture problem that you have to tackle. And while we think a lot about data management best practices and things like data governance and risk protection, do we always think about an intentional communication strategy to build a wide coalition of support across the org? And same as you, Maria, I think it's helpful to have kind of bottoms down and tops down and bottoms up rather, in building that alignment and those coalitions, because it's largely cross-functional. Who owns data? It's a trick question everywhere. Is it us us as consumers? Really, are we responsible for it when it's touched dozens of other people and pipelines and orgs by the time it gets to us? Is it us? Or is it the producers? Is it the people who create it somewhere much further downstream who might not even know that you're using it? And so how do you, yeah. They probably don't. And so how do you drive communication strategies to let those producers know why their work is so important, why you're asking them to do something? How do you create the job for yourself as a leader or within your team that it is your job now to define actually what you need and to talk to those data producers, either kind of one-on-one or in some sort of automated mechanism. We don't always ask ourselves things like that because there's not a communications role. We're very used to being like very technical. We're a field that can attract a lot of introverts. We're kind of famous for this. And yet I spend most of my time talking all day. I'm talking to all of you right now. And so I think that's part of why it can be so difficult. It's not technology. It's absolutely a cross-functional problem. And if you're not thinking about how do I talk to a VP or CFO about this problem? How might I differentiate how I talk to my peer in product management about this problem? How do I inspire a data engineer who's kind of suffering through whatever the demands are on their day? How might I speak to them differently about these problems? It all comes down to similar gaps in quality and how you manage data. We have to really think about who do I need to talk to and how do I speak to them differently?
Great. Thank you, guys. That's really, I mean, that to me is always at the heart of things. And one of the questions I like to ask when I go in and help people build strategies and get their communication plans in place is, who's a data person? Right? And we ask people to raise their hands and most people go, oh no, just the data team starts raising their hand, right? And then we're like, but do you use data? Oh yeah, I use data. Okay, so that makes you a data person. And did you give me data? Oh, provider, that makes, so basically there's not many people who aren't interested in data or could be considered part of the data supply chain that really need to understand their role across that data supply chain. So that's part of the communication, but it's also part of the expertise where you try to train and educate them on what their role is. How do they know the data is right when they put it in the system? How do they know the transformations are happening correctly? How are you testing for quality in those transformations and control points between one system to the next system? Did everything get there? Did some of it fall off during the transformation and load? But I'm going to jump not to another topic, but a little bit broader topic here because in our title of today's session is AI, and we haven't gotten to AI strategies and data strategies and how they're different, of course, or how they're related. So I'll put that out there as an open question. I have an opinion on that, of course. I'm likely similar to yours and many of our people on the call, but I think it's important to talk about building trust in your data strategy, building trust in your AI strategy, and what is the relationship between two, let's say, different strategies, if in fact they are different.
Maria, would you like to go first?
That's a tough one because you can see the overwhelming joy when people talk about AI. In the boards all around, they see it as a best way to improve operational efficiency and cost. And that may very well be. But the first question is, what is going into this AI? And a lot of times they don't think this is a data topic. When the board decides to move the AI and write the AI policy, and sometimes they don't realize this is a subset of a data discipline. And they really view it as something, a completely different animal. The problem is AI only makes usage of data faster and a bit more complex because sometimes you cannot explain very clearly the inner workings of the AI machinery. So if your data is not good, you're just creating poor output faster. And if you want to call that efficiency, you might, but is it really driving your business objective? So there is where my concern always is to jumping on the AI bandwagon unless it is supported by a very solid business data strategy. I am still confused as how that can lead to success. But we see that happening in many organizations. I hear from my peers who complain about the same thing. So I don't know what Mary's experience of this has been, but I see AI with a bit of concern because we know the challenges in data.
I agree with everything you said, and I'll add a few points on top of that. I don't see data and AI strategies as very different from one another. They're frameworks and plans for us to be able to generate value for the business. And they are both part and parcel of a business strategy. A trend I have observed in the last couple of years is that many of us see AI now as this hammer that we can use across the business. We know that there must be a use case. And so we're looking for those nails to find, right? Like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We've gotten, I think, a little ahead of ourselves in some ways, or maybe we've even abandoned some best ways of working where you start with what is the opportunity that you want to drive? What is the opportunity that you want to capitalize on, or the pain point that you want to close? And then figure out what is the right kind of tool that you best will get you there, whether it's in terms of efficiency or cost or like some sort of precision. And then depending on those kinds of use cases, then you can figure out what you need. What are tolerable levels of different kinds of data quality that go into that AI, and work backwards. So once you actually have a business use case, maybe it's driving recommendations, personalizing an experience, summarizing copy, something like that. Let's say maybe it's Gen AI based. Only then do I think you work backwards and figure out, well, of this AI or ML that I need to use to meet that use case, what are tolerable levels for quality? How might I define kind of quality? Does it have to be on time? Do I think that there could be some sort of bias to it that could show up? What kind of risk does that introduce? And I think it's up to business folks and data folks to then really specifically call out, well, like how do we want to define success? What does good data look like here? And then your strategy becomes, well, how do I enable that? How do I continue to define that? How do I measure it? And who's gonna own those domains now? Who's going to take ownership if some sort of threshold is breached to take action? And what does that really look like?
Thank you both. The AI space, obviously, lots to talk about, always being talked about. But I think from a reality perspective, like we're sitting in, we've had these roles where now people have come to us and say, do AI, right? Use AI, when in fact we've been using it for years, maybe decades, right? I mean, these automated ML flows and matching routines and all of the stuff that we've done in financial services for years, those are all AI based. What I think is a little bit new, I shouldn't say it that way, what is a little bit more focused on, and I come from a risk management background. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning, but my training is risk management. I always come at it from the risk side, is now people are much more aware of AI and Gen AI. I don't know if they know all of what it means, but people on this call obviously do. But the risks associated with these assumptions around AI and the use cases and what you will and will not do, let's say, with data, those sort of ethical statements from your organizations and your teams, and ensuring that people are behaving correctly with data. And Mary, you've got a lot of PII over there from a Scribd perspective, right? You've got people, consumers buying books and documents from you on a regular basis with their personal credit cards, right? So I think part of the conversation I'd like to have is building trust in AI. Is it part of your organizational challenges? Have you come up against or talked to the board about how are you going to manage the ethical use of this information? How are you communicating, Mary, that as part of your business strategy, as part of your data strategy, as part of your AI strategy? Can we have a conversation about that? And I think that's part of the framework that needs to be understood and may give some of our listeners today some ideas, some real concrete ideas of how you've handled that challenge and what you've come up against.
Yeah, I can start. So, when I joined Scribd, I spent quite a bit of time, again, understanding our opportunities, understanding our pain points to really continue to refine and play back what our data strategy should be. And instead of just thinking about what someone might see at the end of the day in terms of an analytics product or data product that the team could build, I was also very sure to make sure that data management, including data risk and data governance, were part of our overall data strategy, and that these were frameworks that we wanted to expand on and build into to not only enable trust, like, is the data right, but make sure that it's clear across the entire company how we're going to use data, how we're going to protect privacy, security, and the intent of use of the data that we are using for our different data kinds of products, which could be, your kind of run-of-the-mill reporting, marketing use cases, experimentation, but could also be used for AI or ML, different kinds of applications. So I very much tried to and created alignment around what that strategy should be and why it was important, again, cross-functional again, why that requires alignment from security teams, legal teams, product teams, engineering, and more. But instead of saying that this was a nice to have or something that is not critical because it's not as urgent as maybe something that's more customer facing, very clear, and we are very clear to bring that to the forefront of the work that we're doing and to kind of include any sort of consideration around privacy or security or the intent of use of that data. It's part of every new feature or project that we'll be doing from a data perspective.
Just building on what Mary said, at the ground level and use case level, to need to enforce the ethics of data and the quality of data, security of the data. Also, the top-down comparable action would be to ask the board, what is your risk appetite for AI risk? And try to break it down from there, because you will be surprised. Sometimes they haven't considered that as a part of their operational risk or any of those frameworks, because the topic is new. It hasn't made its way into the framework, risk assessment around AI. And now we have the AI Act, which you need to assess the risk associated with it. And of course, data governance is called out in the AI Act in Europe. It's the first regulation that I know of that calls out data governance specifically, which puts it squarely onto the data function. And then we can grab that from there and try to squeeze it into the framework and the processes and trickle down. For example, I took the data ethics. It's called out in the charter for my function as one of the accountabilities of the data function. That now allows us to be a bit more hands-on and on the education, literacy, and other frameworks, the data stewardship framework, the data governance framework, data quality framework. We can then start breaking that down, what it means for data security, what does ethical use of data mean? And then at the process and procedure level and the use case level, which Mary mentioned. So it is kind of a vertical level of communication and injecting the understanding of AI risk from the risk appetite of the company all the way to use cases, making sure there are controls in place. So once AI is approved, they don't put any other data in there, so that at the level of controls, so that you can monitor what is happening on the ground.
Yeah, I think if you're in a smaller organization and you're wondering, well, who's thinking about our risk appetite for data, or how does it fit into our overall kind of risk registry or kind of risk profile for this company? If you're asking that question, it's probably you. So it is up to you, right, to form those coalitions and understand, well, what other policies and procedures are already in place? How might I partner with my security teams, with my risk team? And is there something that I need to do to take that ownership more formally and maybe evolve some of the policies that we have in place today around how we think about data to further really encompass both regulatory requirements, but also our risk appetite as an organization. And again, if you're asking the question and you don't know who to go to, it probably is you, at least within a smaller organization. So it's really critical to trust internally for everyone working with data, but also really critical towards your customers and continuing to build that trust with anyone who may be using your product, especially in kind of consumer-facing technology orgs.
We have I'll just go down a little bit of a negative twist here from the risk side again. There are instances where you have people in your organizations that are bad actors or that are outside your organization trying to do something not ethical, let's say, with your data. So data is accessible perhaps by many people in your organization. They can create models, they can do whatever. Sometimes they can get their hands on the data and kind of do whatever they want with it. You might not know. Even if you've got a policy that says ethical use and our principles are this, what have you had that experience in finding that kind of thing? And then what controls, I think you were saying enforcement, Maria, but how do you know people are compliant? What mechanisms can you put in place to make sure people are staying within the guide rails of what the company's risk appetite is?
I think the key part of that is the data literacy. They're actually showing people that the risks that they are taking, because in a lot of cases, these people who are doing the wrong thing are completely unaware. And the answer to when you say, why are you doing this? This is posing a risk, is like, we've always done this. Oh, I never thought about this. For them, data is data. Sometimes they're sitting there very focused on the mechanism and achieving an objective in an innovative way, but they're not realizing these are individuals' data that you're playing with. So I think to personalize the topic and educate them, literacy programs are a great way to go, along with the communication strategy from the data office. But also, I think in the longer term, you need to put some technical controls in place that stops people from dragging other data sets into an AI use, or when you approve an AI usage, to make sure that you have the adequate controls measured, someone owns the controls, and they're checked with whatever frequency they need to be checked in. So writing a policy without enforcement and monitoring is really, I don't advise it, because people become complacent that, oh, the policies are always there, but nobody ever checks what we do. And in fact, I find that if you pull out one usage that has not been appropriate and educate the person, you will find this person will then go and tell other people that they had been spoken to, and this is not the best way to go, and they were educated on the topic. And then there is this transparency that their usage is being monitored, that someone is actually looking, and nothing is happening in a black box. And that awareness is always positive. People are conscious that they need to do the right thing.
I completely agree around, like, this is the case where technology and architecture can also very much come into play to reduce that risk. So I'm thinking about three different things. So first, very intentional architecture in terms of your data warehouse or your lakehouse. What are environments that are more sandbox, staging, development that people can have access to and kind of get the work done, versus production environments where there's real data and it may be in some sort of customer facing or business facing endpoint? How do you limit who has access to which piece? That's where, secondly, things like role-based access controls are really important to come in. Who needs the data and for what kind of reason? And be really intentional about how you assign those roles. And then thirdly, I think there are a lot of emerging, developing, and some techniques we've used for a long time to anonymize data, minimize the data that needs to go into use cases, and just kind of otherwise put other protection based applications in place. So I think it's critically important for AI. I hear the question a lot, like, well, once data goes into AI or Gen AI in particular, what does it mean to delete it? Can I do that? How do I get it back out if I need to? And that might be a little unclear given the regulatory environment that we're in and even the technology that we're using overall, like as an industry. And best cases and kind of best approach, again, within the framework of your company or your organization's risk appetite, is what is the minimum amount of data that I need to go into this use case to enable the outcome that I'm looking for? More is not always better. And how do you really think about what is the bare minimum that needs to be ingested or otherwise included in those use cases to make it useful?
There are two things that I often worry about. Is the unintentional deployment of AI. As we now see in certain service providers, within an upgrade, they introduce AI capabilities. And if no one's monitoring those terms of, contract or privacy notices or statements, you may wake up one morning and your browser has AI capabilities you were not aware of, and you may not become aware of till 3 weeks later when someone tells you, oh yeah, I've been using this tool within Outlook or within Microsoft. So this is one area I'm a bit concerned with, especially given the regulation there. We cannot deploy things unintentionally, which I think we have done in the last 6 months or so. I am aware of some of the applications upgrading and enabling AI capabilities. You can disable it, but first you've got to be aware that it was enabled. So that is one area that I am worried about. How do we monitor these terms of reference, terms of conditions, and how we monitor this privacy statement? Who is reading them? With every release, you have a bunch of, privacy statements. Do we need to move to a point where regulation doesn't allow deployment unless, intentionally? So that is one thing that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with at this time. And I think on the data minimization, which Mary mentioned, I think the culture of hoarding data is a very long-standing one, especially in the insurance sector, where we had very limited data and we had to squeeze the life out of it. And nobody would ever dream of deleting data. But those are the old days. We now have so much data. And sometimes I wonder, what percentage of a company's data is actively and productively being used? And my gut feel tells me it's very small percentage. And I think we need to now move away from more is better, which Mary mentioned, that not more is not always better because it comes at a cost. And I think until such time us as heads of data can put a monetary value on every kilobyte of data that we are holding without using, I don't think that needle is going to really shift a lot. And of course, this will likely change in the next 10 years, but it's going to take some very large effort on the side of the data leaders to move that.
Thank you. So, I think the intentionality is like what both of you are saying is it's got to be front and center. It's got to be at the top of mind almost in every thing you're doing these days that has to do with data, because it's hard to avoid AI. You can't. It sneaks up on you in your Chrome or whatever you're using, Safari, whatever. So being intentional about your choices and making others aware that it is important. This is why we're thinking this way. Again, back to Mary's point on communication plans and how much time it really takes to get people to understand what the objectives are and how what we do is creating value, even though it's hard to put the cost and value to each piece of data that we have, but how it is enabling value for your business, because that's why we're doing this. We're not doing it because we just like playing with data. Maybe some people are, but we're doing it because we know that doing this right and right for your organization, your risk levels, your size, your budget, your teams, that kind of thing, doing it right can make a big difference in the success of your company, and the success of the people in your company who are there because they want to be employed and because they believe they can do something that adds value, right? It's so interconnected, this conversation about our companies being successful with our contributions to that company and how we then ourselves are successful, right? So it's a very interconnected conversation. And that intentionality, just to go back to that, is something I think for me is a big takeaway from today's conversation. I know Sophie, you can check us here on time. I think we have about 15 minutes left.
We do.
Yeah, so I think maybe what we could do, I want to address, Paloma's put a question in the chat, which aligns to what we were talking about. So I'm just going to address that as well. And in my experience, a lot of the times when we start showing people data whether it's from an AI model or from a report, the reaction isn't great. They might get defensive, they might blame somebody else. They probably blame you because you're the data person and all the data problems are your fault. We know that. How do you deal with situations like that? I mean, she's even mentioning there's people at risk. Job security, right, can come from this because of this. Have you experienced this? What advice can you give? What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, firstly, I think that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I always take a mental model to build the thing with the broken data, because it's another way to build that coalition. If someone thinks that data is important for a particular use case or something they're trying to do, try to build the thing they need. And what happens when it breaks? How can you use that report or that whatever that analytic or data product or AI product is? How do you measure if it goes wrong? And then you have additional use cases then, right? You have additional points to say, oh, well, now I know this piece of quality is more important than this piece because the report was late or the model is drifting. I know that I'm breaching some sort of what I think of as data quality. How can I better define that and set new targets for it? If something's not working at all or something's really broken, it's a great way to show people why it's important. And very much clarify, I'm not talking about data management. I'm not talking about a pipeline. I'm not talking about an alert or an intensive use. I'm trying to build this thing for someone. And look, this is how it is broken. That is very easy for someone to understand, right? That is part of the storytelling. No one wants to hear about data management. No one wants to hear about data risk. They just want stuff to work. So very much build the thing and never be defensive about it. Yes, we often take the hits when things go wrong, but we make it worse if we are defensive or we try to say, well, I won't build on bad data, or in some cases, I won't build, right? It looks like you're trying to hide it. I say, put that out there and use it as a tool to kind of build a partnership with the person who needs it, to maybe even work together to figure out what's the next layer up. Who are you dependent on as a data producer or data manager to make that work? And really use it to help drive that alignment or that reprioritization.
I think when you arrive at the company as a head of data, everyone's joyous because, you are going to solve all of their problems. You're going to change things. And you say, all right, I can change things, but you all have to change the way you do things. And then you see the room emptied. So the honeymoon is over and then you're the bad person. And then you have to build that trust up again. And then they start trusting you. But until they trust in you, you're not going to really be able to move this. You need to build enough credibility that they don't just trust you because they've seen the output, but they implicitly, trust in you and what you're saying. And I think average tenure of head of data is about 2.5 years, which makes me believe most of data leaders don't make it to the trust in you phase to be able to really make a material impact that they need and they can make. And I think there is the issue of how do we make the duration of this journey become long enough for us to not only go through the harsh phase, but actually see it come to fruition. We need to move from output driven to outcome driven. We don't want to tick boxes. We want to actually get somewhere concrete that shows our success. And I think business needs to also move from output to outcome, because sometimes their requirements are more, again, output driven rather than outcome driven. This is the mindset overall that needs to shift.
I totally agree that trust in data starts with you, trusting you as the leader. And I think that's part of why, again, I say it's important to show the broken thing, because it shows an honesty and a transparency and a willingness to partner to figure the root causes that are blocking us from whatever it is that the outcome that we are trying to drive. I think it's important to have discrete problems that you're trying to solve so that you can bite off a piece and make meaningful progress and start to build some success, which then goes back into trust and probably gives you a little bit more credibility for kind of larger scale transformations like the kinds that you're talking about too, Maria.
I think the path is never straightforward, right? On this, I like your timeline there, Maria, about describing, you get in, honeymoon, and then something goes bad, and you got to build it back up again. I think those are in the roles I've had. There's definitely those types of waves in the experience. Expectations are set wrong with the new role, but I think everybody experiences things differently. And I want to make sure that people that are on this call understand that it is a two-way street, right? So you can try as hard as you can, and sometimes you meet with an extraordinary amount of resistance because of things happening in that organization. And so I don't want people to think it's always the CDO's fault or the data leader's fault, because we're all learning. We have people coming on these calls for years, right? People enjoy talking. We have communities that talk about this challenge all the time. So we're very aware of it. But sometimes it does take a partner to dance with to make this work. And Mary, your very first point was find those partnerships and make those collaborations work. And those little wins start to add up. And then you get the advocacy from your partners and your stakeholders in the business that start speaking on your behalf, which is also advantageous and starts to smooth that journey along the road. And it's not always smooth. So the value of these types of conversations is that you can talk to other people when you get those bumpy roads. We talk to people, Cynozure team, you can reach out to Mary, you can reach out to Maria, you can reach out to me, and really, have honest conversations about how hard this is sometimes, and then put your game face back on and go back to work and make it work, right? So I'll end it there. If Mary or Maria have a couple of takeaways they want to give about today's conversation, or just nuggets to leave these guys with, and then I'll turn it back to Sophie.
Well, building on what you said, Jennifer, I think building trust is building trust in you, and you don't go it alone. You play back what you think, and you build partnerships and ambassadors across your organization, whether that's from the top, from your peers, or even from people on working teams building things up. But don't underestimate the power of the relationships that you build as an individual to drive trust in what you're building.
Just building on that, I think also it is important to highlight that the data role is very political role in an organization. Suddenly you're up in everyone's business. You can become very quickly a political target. Don't take that personally. You just have to persevere. This role is relatively new. The organization doesn't know how to react to certain requests. You make certain policies, you write. I think that is just a natural part of the journey. We are in the ramp up phase of the recognition of the role formally. And I think these problems may not be around in 10 years' time, where every company has a chief data officer, when it's completely established who you are and your position is not questioned. So don't lose hope if you're struggling to get this ball moving up the hill. We've all been there, and it's just a trial and error for the time being, and hopefully it will get easier over time.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, ladies. It was really nice to sit and listen to that. And I know that people who are on the call with us will have taken so much value from it. So real massive thank you for sharing your insight and your experiences. Mary, Jen and Maria have all very kindly agreed to be open to connecting with people on LinkedIn. If you would like to connect, I'm going to copy and paste their LinkedIn profiles into the chat here, which is one thing that you can do if you would like to get in touch. If you would like some additional support, feel free to reach out to us at Cynozure. I know that many of you have come along to a few of these different webinars now, and if you found it useful, you've been before, you'll know where to see what's coming up next, but I'll also post the link to upcoming virtual events on this topic and other topics in the chat too. Coming up to the hour, wrapped us up really nicely there, Jen. Thank you for that. And thank you to you, Mary, for joining. Thank you to you, Maria. And thank you to everyone on the chat who's commented and asked questions and added to our conversation today. It's been brilliant sharing the last 55 minutes with you. And I hope you all have a brilliant rest of day.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mary, Maria, and Sophie. Bye-bye.
Bye now.